The most notable rejection that comes to memory was back in high school. There was this girl in my English class whom I had a massive crush on, and like any delusional teenager, I thought she was into me as much as I was into her. After months of indulging in my own fantasy, I asked her out, and I got rejected. She was very polite, but I took it very personally, and I mean really personally. I couldn't even bear to see her in the hallway, so I figured out her course schedule and I intentionally planned my routes around hers. It was a very painful experience, and as you can imagine, it's rather an extreme case. But I think it shows how we can take rejections personally sometimes. And that's completely natural. As intellectual animals, we want answers. We want to know why. We want to understand how things happen, especially when it's something that affects us so deeply. And the tricky thing about relationship is that we tend to zoom in on what we've done, our input into the relationship. And whatever response that we get, we take it as a direct reflection of that input. I asked the girl out, which was my input. I got rejected, which was the output. So that must mean something was wrong with me, right? But you see, that mindset is neither true of reality nor very productive, because it somewhat overlooks the other party. The problem with that mindset is that we overstate our own role in how relationships turn out. In reality, relationships are cooperations. We need each other to survive, and so we build relationships. Starting from hunter-gatherer societies, we depended on one another for food, for survival, and for maintaining a healthy emotional and social life. Relationships, at the end of the day, are cooperations between individuals. And as equal individuals, we each have our own needs and demands. And for cooperations to work, those needs have to be respected and they have to align. That's why you hear so much about boundaries and responsibilities when people talk about relationships. Because for any equal and free cooperation to work, it has to be mutually beneficial. But unfortunately, sometimes those arrangements don't always work out. Our needs and demands don't always align. And that's where rejections can occur. But honestly, I think it's a beautiful thing. It means there are people out there who can appreciate us and people we can appreciate. Of course, the cost of that is that we have to figure out a sustainable arrangement. So rejections happen because we don't always agree on the terms of our cooperation. And when rejections occur, the question becomes, how do we deal with it? Right? Do we ignore rejections? Do we bulldoze through it? Because rejections, like anything else, has some nutrition in it if we're willing to break it down, if we're willing to take what is good for us and leave what is bad for us behind. Now, this is tricky because rejections can feel very absolute. It can feel like there's no way around it. A rejection is a rejection. I remember getting an F on my first year university French midterm, and an F sounds pretty absolute, and it sounds like I've learned nothing at all. And often the negative emotions that come with rejections are quite strong enough to get into our heads and stop ourselves before anyone else does. So here's an analogy that might help. Imagine a ball falling down a pipe. The ball is guided by gravity, just like how we are guided by our goals. The ball wants to fall straight down, just like how we want to get to our goals as quickly as possible. But the pipe, just like the path that we must take, has twists and turns and walls and obstacles along the way. The ball will almost regularly hit things along the way. And to us, that impact is the rejection. Every time we face a rejection, we have to change our plans or find another way. Now, generally, there are a few ways that we can respond to rejections. The first is to reject it completely. Imagine the ball bumps into a wall, but it tries to power through. That's not physically possible, but sometimes we do that. We pretend the rejection doesn't mean anything and we ignore it. But of course, if we do that, we risk repeating the same mistakes. The second way is to absorb it completely. The ball hits a wall and it just bounces straight back. It stops progressing. And sometimes we take in that negative sentiment so strongly that we stop ourselves and retreat. Now, there's a third way. a healthier, more productive way, which is to neither reject it completely nor absorb it completely. In reality, when a ball is traveling down a pipe and it hits something, it loses some momentum, but it keeps some momentum. The momentum that it keeps is a source of its perseverance, but the momentum that it loses is not lost either. It's traded for a redirection. If you think about rejections, we are told what doesn't work, but it gives us an opportunity to think about what could work instead. That is what digesting rejection looks like. Rejection is not hitting a wall straight on or being lost in a dead end, but we are merely hitting an obstacle at an angle. We lose what doesn't work, but we keep what works. We adjust, we redirect, we change strategies a little bit. And those bumps along the way, they help us make better guesses, even if we don't know exactly what the best path is. And that's because we now have more information about what doesn't work. So next time when you face a rejection, think of it as you're in a maze. Maybe you've just walked into a dead end, but it doesn't mean that the entire path that you took thus far was wasted. It just means that that particular turn doesn't work out. I mean, even an F on a test can mean that I got 49% correct. Or think about being rejected by your crush. Does it mean that they never liked you one bit? Of course not. It just means that you guys aren't compatible enough to be lovers. So far, we discussed two things. First, we talk about thinking of relationships as cooperations. Being rejected doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means that your demand and needs don't perfectly match theirs. There are always other ways of building relationships, building cooperations, and achieving our own goals. Second, we talked about thinking of rejection not as a dead end, but as hitting an obstacle at an angle. And whatever momentum you still have, even if it's just a little bit, make sure you hold on to it and keep moving forward. All right, that's all I have for today. I hope these perspectives help out a little bit.